It is, without a doubt, one of the most controversial books ever written. Its supporters find it to be greatly inspirational. Its detractors, however, find it to be highly objectionable. In fact, A.A. Milne, the author of the Winnie the Pooh books, found this book so distasteful that he once said, quote, "It is responsible for more atheism, agnosticism, disbelief, call it what you will, than any book ever written." This controversial book, the Old Testament. As someone who has read through the Old Testament numerous times, I certainly understand both sides of the argument. Of course, the Old Testament I find to be greatly inspirational. It tells us about an almighty God who lovingly creates this world and each one of us. The Ten Commandments give us a basic rule of life, teaching us how we are to live in relation to God and to one another. It tells us about God's great patience with His chosen people, even though they continually turn their backs on Him. And the Psalms speak to us at a personal level, teaching us that it is okay to express our deepest emotions to God. However, I also find portions of the Old Testament to be disturbing, even very disturbing. Some of the Levitical laws make absolutely no sense to me. We have stories of rape and incest. And most problematic of all, we have stories of extreme violence. Elisha cursing a group of small boys simply because they were calling him names. Jephthah burning his daughter to death in fulfillment of a foolish vow he made. And frankly, God seems to be the most zealous of all, destroying the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah for their evil ways, killing Uzzah simply for touching the Ark of the Covenant, and ordering the total destruction of all of Israel's enemies. No doubt, in the 39 books of the Old Testament, we have a wide variety of material, some of which comforts us, some of which repulses us. I begin by talking about the Old Testament because as I turn to our gospel lesson for this morning, it plays a significant role in that story. The story takes place that first Easter day. Luke informs us that two of Jesus' disciples, one named Cleopas and the other unnamed, were traveling from Jerusalem to a town called Emmaus, which we are told was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And in the midst of their journey, they were met by a stranger. We learn from Luke that this person was Jesus. But these two disciples do not yet know that it is their Lord. Jesus engages them in a conversation in which they recount for him the events that have just happened in Jerusalem. How Jesus, who they had hoped would be their Messiah, was handed over by their religious leaders and was condemned to death and crucified. But even more, they recently heard a rumor. Some women had gone to the tomb and discovered that it was empty. They were met by a group of angels who informed them that Jesus was alive again. It is at this point that Jesus speaks up. "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" In these words, Jesus admonishes these two followers. All the information they needed was at their disposal. All that they needed to know was already declared to them by the prophets. And all of them were pointing them directly toward Jesus. In summarizing what he did next, Luke writes, "Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures." Lest we miss the point, the scriptures that Jesus interpreted for them, Moses and all the prophets, were none other than what we call the Old Testament. Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. I realize that that may be a challenging concept for some. It may seem like finding a needle in a haystack. Or to use my image from Easter Sunday, finding Waldo in one of his books may seem like an easier proposition. Sure, we know that parts of Jesus' life are described by the Old Testament prophets. Micah told us that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Zechariah told us that this future king would come riding in on a donkey. And Isaiah told us about the one who would be the suffering servant. He poured himself out to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sins of many. But these prophecies seem to be more the exception than the rule. For the most part, people struggle to reconcile these two testaments. The God of Israel seems to